Palantir has the potential to literally be one of the greatest investments of our time. And I get it that can kind of sound like a fever dream or maybe a bit hyperbole. But if you give me the chance to explain, I think you'll see why. So whether you're a current investor in Palantir or have maybe been considering buying some shares of a truly incredible company, then this is the video for you, as I'm going to go over some of the most recent things with Palantir that I think are crucial to understand. And also, if you want to stay up to date with the most entertaining Palantir videos on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, if for anything, to show your support for all the hard work that I put in for you guys to make these kinds of videos. Anyway though, let's get into the details of my stance with Palantir and why I think all investors should be paying very close attention to this stock. With a lot of people seemingly on the edge of their seats as geopolitical conflicts in the world arise, I believe that right now there's a case to be made that companies like Palantir have all the chances to play a greater role in helping governments improve their national security and at the same time assist the private sectors with securing their supply chains to minimize geopolitical risks. Especially since now, governments are essentially required to take their national security more seriously to strengthen their deterrence and avoid a global war. So where exactly does Palantir fit into all of this geopolitical stuff? Well, Palantir's software has actually already proved to be quite useful in Ukraine, and on top of that, their latest successful earnings results indicate that Palantir has some pretty good chances to grow at an aggressive rate. So as a surprise to no one, I'm extremely bullish on Palantir, and I believe that it is not only the best geopolitical investment of the decade, but quite potentially the best investment of our life, period. So let me explain this a bit further. The release of Palantir's successful earnings report of Q4 earlier this month indicates that they're more than likely going to continue to generate double-digit returns even in the current turbulent macroeconomic environment. So by growing its revenues by 17.5% year over year to $508 million in Q4, Palantir is proving to be resilient to the weaker growth of the overall economy. And as a result, its stock will more likely than not create a ton of shareholder value in the future. What's also important to mention is that Q4 has been the very first quarter where Palantir has become GAAP profitable. However, this doesn't tell the full story, as Palantir has always been profitable on an operational level. But with the high stock-based compensation expenses that they use to attract and retain their extremely high-quality talent, well, this has always been one of the major downsides of the business that actually led to a weaker bottom line performance and overall net loss, even though I personally think that attracting all this high quality talent was definitely worth it in the long run. So with that being said, if we take a look at a more bearish perspective on Palantir, dilution tends to come up a lot as one of the main arguments as to why you should avoid investing in Palantir. However, the very first profitable quarter, coupled with the management's forecast of remaining GAAP profitable for the whole fiscal year of 2023, shows that one of the biggest bearish arguments against Palantir is no longer relevant in my opinion. And let's also not forget the fact that Palantir has an extremely strong balance sheet with over $2 billion in cash and less than $300 million of debt. However, even in the most conservative scenario of Palantir's stock, I still believe that right now, it is currently trading below fair value. So what this means for you is, if you're someone who's been watching the stock from the sidelines and has maybe been considering starting a position, to be honest, I think now is the time. Going forward though, I think it's safe to assume that Palantir's growth story is far from over, and they have all the chances to continue to generate incredible returns in the future. You see, about a year ago, there were a lot of questions about whether Palantir's government business would be able to grow at a double-digit rate, and then the situation between Russia and Ukraine occurred. But to be honest, it's these kinds of unforeseen events, I think, that ensured that Palantir's software for government agencies would continue to be in high demand in the foreseeable future. And the fact that government revenues in Q4 increased by 23% year over year to $293 million, and we're also above the commercial revenues, shows that Palantir is likely to continue to benefit from the environment of heightened geopolitical risks, in which governments around the globe are beginning to take their national security much more seriously and are investing more into their deterrence capabilities. What's also important to mention is that there's an indication that Palantir's satellite constellation software has been actively used by Ukraine to successfully repel Russian forces from around half of the territory that Russia had conquered during the initial months of the invasion, which honestly just shows how important Palantir's software is in the modern-day battlefield. Currently though, being that it seems that the conflict is far from over, there are signs that even China is exploring options to provide military assistance to Moscow, which just means that Palantir's software will likely continue to be in high demand. Now, whether or not China actually decides to move in and help Russia is honestly up for debate. But regardless of the outcome, the fact that the United States and its allies can utilize Palantir's software really gives a huge advantage to them. And on top of that, there's also a case to be made that Palantir's commercial software would also continue to be in high demand as well in the following years, due to its ability to help the private sector to find weak spots within the supply chains and offer solutions on how to fix them to minimize geopolitical risks. You see, the fact that Palantir managed to increase its customer count by 55% year over year in Q4, and at the same time has increased the average annual revenue per its top 20 customers, well, to me, this indicates that their commercial business is going to continue to flourish for years to come. And all of these developments also indicate that Palantir could have an even greater upside than some of the most conservative estimates that I've seen, as all the growth catalysts I just mentioned could truly improve the overall performance of the business and lead to the upward trajectory of Palantir's stock. However, I think it's equally as important that investors hear this next bit that I'm gonna say. Despite all the positive developments, investors nevertheless need to consider one major risk that could undermine the whole bullish thesis. Let's not forget that before 2022, Palantir's management was aiming to increase its annual revenues by around 30% year over year throughout 2025. However, in the first half of 2022, it became obvious that Palantir wouldn't be able to achieve such a high growth rate due to the worsening macroeconomic environment that basically undermined the entire outlook. A similar thing is true for this year as well, as management's updated guidance shows that Palantir is expected to generate around $2.18 to $2.23 billion in revenue, which would indicate an annual growth rate of around 15 to 16%, which, mind you, is still below the initial forecasted annual growth rate of 30%. So while I don't think that the growth rate will be below 15% this year, due to all the growth catalysts that I described, there's always a slim chance that things couldn't go quite as expected, and as a result, there's always the possibility that Palantir could disappoint its investors and grow at a slower rate than initially thought. However, with that being said, I think this is only a small hurdle in the long and promising road that Palantir has in front of them. You see, Palantir has everything going for it to continue to generate aggressive returns, even in the current environment that we're in right now, as its services are more than likely going to continue to be in high demand amongst government agencies and the private sectors for years down the line. And to this, the fact that the business has become GAAP profitable this year, well, I think it's obvious that Palantir is extremely likely to create some serious shareholder value in the very foreseeable future, thanks to the importance of its software in the arena of heightened geopolitical risks. And as such, I'm convinced that Palantir is the investment of a lifetime, as it continues to strengthen the power of the Western world and all of its allies. And with that, I think I'd like to wrap up the video here. Thanks as always, and I'll catch you next time.